So we can go ahead and get started. I'll kind of get us somewhat introduced. Jerry, if you can kind of introduce Kathy and Erika for us, and then we'll get started. That would be great. Are we all set?
Yes.
I think so.
Okay.
We
All right.
are.
Great.
So,
Okay.
okay, guys. So I want to introduce Kathy Dodge Clay and Erika Garza, who are just two phenomenal school leaders, and I'll let them kind of tell a little bit about themselves. But our worlds collided when, and I don't want to call it a collision because I feel like a collision sounds kind of negative. But our worlds came together,
There we go.
as Kathy would always say, through great synergy of being a part of TEPSA. So TEPSA was actually the connector for all three of us. And so I'll let Kathy and Erika just tell a little bit about themselves. Kathy, you want to go first?
Awesome. Well, thank you for having us today and for letting us share and be a part of this podcast. I remember distinctly we were at summer conference about 2017, and it was about the time that the T-TESS book was coming full circle, and another great state initiative mandate that we all look forward to. And so it was a topic of discussion at the principal summer conference. And I think it must have been a happy hour. It had to have been like whose
Kathy,
idea?
it was. Remember Cheesecake Factory? We
Ooh.
were going there before the awards ceremony. I remember distinctly.
Oh, it was the Cheesecake Factory, and I think we only had one drink, so there you go.
There
But
you go.
anyway,
Only one.
yeah, yeah, just took one and leave it to a group of principals. And anyway, one thing led to another, and I think it was about the year that I was thinking about retirement, and we said, somebody needs to help principals and do something that is going to be a time saver with all of that was coming down the pike with T-TESS, and that was the beginning of uh, our project. And then, as I recall, it was a lot of sitting around the table, laying on the floor, chart paper, and post-it notes, and that's how it all began.
Yep. Erika?
So hi, I'm Erika Garza, and yes, we were all principals at the same time, talking a lot about how to really help teachers grow. And the funny thing is, we did have PADOS was the evaluation tool for years for teachers. And once T-TESS came out, I remember Jerry and I just talking about it and how excited we were. Kind of felt like little nerds, but the T-TESS tool we were excited about because we really felt like PADOS itself really, once a teacher, you had a very proficient teacher that was great and fabulous, they really fell on that exceeds expectations. And there really was nowhere else for them to grow from there.
Yeah.
And so when we saw that TEA brought about this new tool, evaluation tool, we were very excited about what it could bring to the table. But yes, all of us have been teachers. I mean, me personally, I've been a teacher. I've provided professional development, assistant principal. And so coming now full circle to wanting to help teachers grow.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, thanks for kind of sharing how you guys got to know each other. I'm sure we'll hear more stories as we keep going. One of my favorite places to start with new guests, I love to hear about what your experience was like in school and kind of how that or if that impacted your decision to go into education. So, Kathy, can we start with you and kind of just hear like what were you like as a student? How did you feel about going to school? What was your experience like with school and grade school and secondary?
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and
Okay.
so my father was a college professor and educator, and at one time the director of special education for the state of Nebraska.
Okay.
and had a doctorate in educational psychology, and my sister's a teacher. So I come from a family of educators, and
Nice.
that was always the conversation around the dinner table. And so
Mm-hmm.
my education as a student, I think that I've got a lot of just characteristics of overachiever, and wanting to be a teacher pleaser and
Yeah.
a perfectionist. I have my mother saved some of my papers when I was in first
Mm-hmm.
grade, and the teacher would write on my paper, "Please write darker." And I would write real light so my printing would be perfect. So if it wasn't, I could erase and it wouldn't be
Yep.
hard.
Yep.
I did not know
Yep.
that about you,
So,
Kathy. That's interesting.
uh, so, but yes. And then I went on to, um, oh, uh, taught for many years, and
Mm.
came to Texas from Nebraska as a bilingual elementary school teacher.
Okay.
And that was in 1981. I began my teaching career in Houston, inner city Houston, and
Okay.
taught secondary school.
Okay.
And that's my background. That went on into starting my doctorate at A&M, and a degree in educational administration, teacher, vice
Mm-hmm.
principal, principal. But it all started with, you know, uh, lots of upbringing where a high
Oh
premium
yeah.
was placed on education.
Yep, yep. I grew up around a dinner table of educators as well, so I know what that's like. And my parents often worked at the same campus, and they both were in sped and would have some of the same students. My dad did it; he's an ED counselor. My mom was a teacher, and so they would, lots of our conversations were, what crazy thing happened at the ARD that day, or whatever else. Like it was. Yeah, I've been there. Erika, I would love to hear about what school was like for you as a kid too.
Well, my background is actually quite different, probably the opposite from Kathy's,
Okay, I'd
in
love to hear
that
it.
I'm actually a first generation college student. So I did not have any
Okay.
educators in my family.
Yeah.
My father dropped out of school at 9 years old. He's from Mexico. My mother dropped out of
Mhm.
school her junior year. So for
Mhm.
me, I'm the oldest of five. And
Okay.
I grew up well, actually, I was born in El Paso and
Oh.
raised in Odessa, Texas. We moved to Odessa in 1980 during the oil boom.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I just remember wanting to start school so bad because, being the
Mm.
firstborn, it wasn't until my sister wasn't born until I was about 5 years old. My
Okay.
birthday's in November. So, as educators, we all know that means I had to wait a whole nother year to start
Yep.
kindergarten. I wanted to start so bad. And they said, no, you're born
Mm.
after September 1st. So, you have to wait.
Yep. Right.
And once I started school, I was blessed that I started at a school that was in the south end of town. So there was a lot of Hispanic students, and
Mm.
I
Mhm.
only spoke Spanish. My first language is
Mhm.
Spanish, and
Mhm.
kindergarten, first grade, it was pretty much my teachers knew both languages, and I had a lot of students around me, my
Mm.
classmates that spoke both languages. So it wasn't hard
Yeah.
for me. Now,
Yeah.
second grade, we moved over to the north side of town,
Okay.
where I was, the only Hispanic student. I do have
Mhm.
to say, my brother, which was the third one that was born, he had
Mhm.
to actually be bused to a bilingual campus because he did
Okay.
participate in
Yeah.
the bilingual program back then.
Yeah.
But as a student, in that, Kathy, I'm exactly like you. I mean, I was a very
Mm.
hard worker, a teacher
Yeah.
pleaser. I wanted to make sure that everything was right, that I had straight A's,
Mhm.
that everything was perfect.
Yep.
And I would come home, bring home all of my books. And my sister, who was, 5 years younger than me, I would play school with her and teach her all
Mm.
the things and teach her how to speak English, teach her. I mean, I really loved education altogether. And so once I decided to have a career, there was no doubt in my mind that that's what I wanted to do. And I started off as a
Mm.
bilingual teacher as well, Kathy.
Aw.
It's how I started my career and just wanting to really help, other families and other students that might have gone through some of the things that I went through, having to learn and go through school. And I'm a lover of learning.
Mm.
I think Jerry, Kathy, we are always talking about how much we just love learning.
Mhm.
Every time we go
Yeah.
to conferences, to like the TEPSA conference, Jerry's always like, doesn't it just feel like we just have this like shot in the arm of great learning? And we're always
Yeah.
excited to learn new things
Right.
in different ways. And so I think just the love of learning is what
Yeah.
puts us all, that of us that are excited about education puts us in this career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now I'd love to hear a little bit more about the inception of the T-TESS Blackbook that y'all put together. Like, what were those first conversations really like? Like, how did you guys decide, let's do this thing?
Well, we realized how hard it was, Beth. And I think that
Mm,
Kathy alluded to that when we were all at the Cheesecake Factory, which we had, different conversations about it. But what the common thing that we found out amongst all of us is that we were spending a lot of time writing evaluations and
mm,
giving feedback. And we were
mm.
like, there's got to be an easier way. And
Yeah.
Kathy just really hung on to that and didn't let go of it. Because Kathy, do you remember?
Mm,
Like you kept like texting, you kept following up. Okay, girls, we've got to get together. Kathy was like the catalyst of we got to get
mm.
this ball going because
Yeah.
it's got to be easier than what we're doing and the way we're having to do it.
Mm. I love that. Go ahead, Erica.
I remember just having conversations, yes, like Jerry said, that this process, while we were super excited that TEA came out with this new evaluation system through T-TESS, we felt like there had to be a way to help principals get through it because principals spent so many hours. I mean, we knew we did it. There was nights when on a Friday night, we're such nerds, but we'd call each
Hmm.
other up, Jerry and I, and we're like, okay, I'm working on T-Test tonight. I have my glass of wine and my scripted notes on all these observations that I did. And because deep down, we really wanted to provide good feedback to the teachers so that they
Mm-hmm.
can improve. At the
Sure.
end of the day,
Yeah.
that's the goal. Um,
Right.
Time is always the enemy of educators, of everybody, but especially educators, because there's never enough
Yeah.
time in the day to get that
Right.
done. So that's what we ended up doing on Friday nights with a glass of wine. And how sad is it, right? Instead of going out and about on a Friday night, we're completing our
Yeah,
evaluations.
sure.
And
Yep.
so that's where we said we've got to find a tool that makes it easier and principals aren't having to spend late nights, evenings. I remember vividly. My first year as principal, I would wake up at like set my alarm at 4 in the morning. My kids were very young at that time, and I wanted to make sure after
Mm,
I got home that I read to them, put them to bed.
yeah,
And then I
right.
was exhausted, and I would set my alarm for 4 a.m. so that I could sit there and have quiet time to work on teacher evaluations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. Yep. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners find themselves in a similar place. Like just yeah, it's a lot.
Well, and
So
Kathy, well, one of the things, if I add on here, Kathy, I remember we would meet together at one of our homes. So it would be Kathy's house or Erika, and Kathy really dug into the teacher standards. Remember, Kathy, the epiphany
Right.
that you had with us when you're like, oh my gosh, these are super important and something that as administrators we literally, I mean, I'm just going to admit, had glossed over for me, like not even really knowing the
mm,
depth of what those were. And we were evaluating
mm,
teachers, right, Kathy?
Yes. That was wow. One of the things that was so interesting is T-test was relatively new, and I can remember during the training that we went to as principals, they just drilled in our heads. Proficient is a rock solid teacher. If
Yeah.
you are scoring a teacher
mm,
proficient, it's a rock solid teacher. Well, you get teachers, which um, I had many, many, many of them that they weren't
mm-hmm.
okay with being proficient because they
No.
were the ones
Mm-hmm.
there at 6 and 7 o'clock at night that were sacrificing their everything. Teaching was their life, and
Yeah.
so those were some conversations, and so we really, you know, it pierced us in the heart, all of us, because we were experiencing that, having to not only provide the evaluation but
Mm-hmm.
then having the rigor of the instrument increasing,
Right.
and trying to figure out how we were going to communicate with teachers that, with an understanding, allowing them to understand that when you look at the instrument, that proficient, my goodness, if you hit proficient, that was.
Right.
But one thing I wanted to say is that's when we came together, and we have Erica with an E, Kathy with a K, and Jerry with a G, and we formed the EK group, the heartbeat, EKG, Educational Knowledge Group, the heartbeat of
Mm-hmm.
principals. And we worked countless hours, just
A
laying on the floor,
Kathy, a
and
year. Do you remember? I remember my
yeah,
son saying, "Mom,
Wow.
y'all have been working on this for a year, really?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Eric, that's how long it takes when you're really
Uh,
refining something,
but
and
yeah.
putting in the work to make it a meaningful tool for administrators, other principals to
but
use."
yeah, it was super. It was fascinating. It was like, how as teachers, we always say that as a teacher, you should allow students to share their metacognitive secrets. Like if you're teaching math, they need to talk about how they came up with that
Right.
answer, because that really accentuates and takes the learning to an even higher level. And that
Mm-hmm.
was what was so cool about the three of us working together, is we did have this great
Mm.
synergy, and we really unpacked the rubric, and it was like we were sharing our metacognitive secrets. And probably the
Yeah.
biggest aha that I just felt almost like a pit in my stomach, that I didn't even realize how important the T-TESS, or the Texas Teaching Proficiency Standards, were. That the whole
Mm.
instrument itself is based on the
Yeah.
the standards, which are based
Mm-hmm.
on the national standards. But the reality of your job as a principal, I went to the training. I probably went to the
Mm-hmm.
training 2 times, and I had no idea. That did not occur to me until we sat down and really studied it and talked about it.
Mm.
And that is the whole backbone of the T-TESS instrument, and it
Yeah.
really is a strong footing as a principal to be able to have some of those difficult conversations that you have with a teacher, because those are the standards. Those.
Right.
Right.
And I think just having that opportunity, like we met, the reality is all three of us were practicing principles at the time. And so having to work all day, deal with teachers, community, parents,
Right. Right.
everybody. We scheduled our meetings for Saturday. So every Saturday at 9 a.m., picked one of our houses to meet at. And
Wow.
we broke up every single dimension. And every Saturday, we would sit and just talk about that dimension and talk it through.
Mm.
We would talk about, like Kathy said, we would share our experiences. And
Mm-hmm.
in talking about, when I look for this specific dimension, what does that say? What do you look for, Kathy? What do you
Mm-hmm.
look for, Jerry? And it was
Yeah.
this whole having conversations for up to, almost 3 hours. And then finally being like,
Yeah.
okay, guys, the Saturday's
Like, we
getting
gotta
away
go.
from
Our
us.
husbands are
It's
waiting.
time.
Family.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
time to kind of stop, put our thoughts on paper, and just kind of give each other an assignment on how we were all going to, what we were going to put down on paper. But I think what
Mm.
really was the most important is having that opportunity to have those discussions, because principals don't get that opportunity. You don't,
Yeah.
to sit down and talk about every dimension. What does this
Right.
look like in reality when we walk into a classroom? What do I
Yeah.
see when I walk into a classroom? I'm reading domain 3, classroom management. But
Mm-hmm.
what does this actually look like if I look at a proficient teacher or somebody that's at accomplished? What does that look like?
Yeah.
Because if we don't know what it looks like, then it's really difficult for us to be able
Right.
to talk to our teachers and provide feedback on
Yeah.
that.
And
That's really cool.
yeah, I think it there is such a you know, I want to say mumbo jumbo. That's not the most professional terminology, but we would read some of those
Yeah.
descriptors and we'd say, "What?" And
Yeah.
it's like we put it in layman's terms, or what
Mm-hmm.
does this look like? What does this say?
Yeah.
What does it, so that a principal could easily, readily, identify what would this, we did our own little T chart, looks like, sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
If I walk in, what is this? So, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the
I
coolest
love
thing
that.
was, and I think the coolest thing, Kathy and Erika, from that is that then we created like catchphrases. So, like descriptors of all the different look fors. And so when a principal was going in looking for, I'm just going to use classroom, environment, like you had talked about, Erika, they would automatically find one or two at least of the look fors in one of the domains. And then when they would go with their evidence to figure out, like, okay, what can I describe? It's really just putting it in other language, but not having to
Right.
create that language for yourself. And I think the thing that made it the
Yeah.
most beneficial and the way we were able to do it is because we collaborated. And that's the one piece missing
Right.
for administrators to be able to come together and truly have a conversation about those look boards. It's gotten a little bit better now with teacher incentive allotment. I know in my previous district, we did calibrations on our data collection year. And so within that realm, but I'm going to tell you flat out, it was nothing to the depth that what the conversations that we would have because we had dedicated time for it. And let's face it, ladies, we're nerds. I mean, we kind of got so into like time would get away from us literally when we would go through and have these conversations.
Well, that makes me think about the rural districts or those isolated principals that are reading this and feeling like, I don't know what this means, and that's my fault, and how that could make someone feel in the job or in the role and lack that confidence. And I love hearing that y'all got together and were like, yeah, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's put it into terms that like we can all understand, that we can visualize and see and be better able to use this tool.
Right.
Calibration is really the important thing, as Jerry and Kathy said. I mean, calibration, all of us, because all of us have different experiences, all of us come with it. We can read the same exact thing and come about it from a different mindset. We know, like, for example, being a principal, I would make sure that me and my assistant principal would walk into a classroom, do a walkthrough, and then come outside and talk about it. Because a lot of times, my assistant principal would see something that I wouldn't see, or vice versa. And having those conversations and, well, how do you see that this would line up with the tool? And
Interesting.
having those conversations and be able to make sure that we're on the same page and we see things the same. Because how many times, you don't want people to say, oh, I'd rather Miss Garza observe me, or I'd rather Miss Spellman observe me. We
Right.
want to make
Sure.
sure that all of us are on the same page, especially with TIA. That's very important.
Interesting. I haven't heard a lot of that. A lot of principals and APs doing those walkthroughs together and getting to have that dialogue, but that does seem so important. That's really fascinating.
Well, time is always a factor. And so now
Right.
principals and assistant principals are so busy and caught up in all of the other things that we have to be intentional and like calendar it out. Like once a week, we're gonna go into this grade level, this content area, and really utilizing your campus data as being that force of being strategic about it, because you don't have time to do them together all the time. So being very strategic as a leader in what your campus data is saying, and then where do you feel like you're going to be able to get your biggest bang for your buck, and giving feedback within that teacher's classroom.
Tell me a little bit more about that, about the strategic element. Like, how did you all decide, okay, these are the classrooms that I really want us to observe together?
Well, I can give you an example. For example, we were struggling with math. I mean, our data, overarching math, it said that we were not where we need to be. So we knew every time we went in to do a walkthrough or we did an evaluation, I mean, teachers knew, it wasn't a surprise. You know what? We're going to come in during math because we want to see, there's two things. You want to be able to see the great things that are taking place, especially in the classrooms where the data is off the chart, where student achievement is really rocking. Because then when we go and have team collaboration meetings, you're able to have a conversation and bring that to the table within a PLC model of,
Yeah.
who's moving the needle and what are they doing, and then being able to share what
Right.
they're doing and why.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that, we all participated in the Trinity Principal Center here in
Yes.
San
Mm.
Antonio,
We
Mm-hmm.
did.
and how things kind of recycle in education every few years. Well,
Mm.
Trinity was very progressive with Richard Elmore's work on the learning
Mm-hmm.
walks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all where we would actually, I can remember meeting at high schools and meet together, and we were
Mhm.
basically doing that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing, calibrating. And so, what
Mm.
they were trying to, the takeaway for that was that we need to be having those same conversations with teachers, because unless a teacher has experienced it or had the chance to have conversations about it, they don't know what those look fors. They don't have
Yeah.
a similar shared understanding of the look fors. So I can remember that there was a video by author Tony Wagner was his name. I think he was from the East Coast,
Mm.
and basically I showed it at a faculty meeting, and it was a video that was supposed to accentuate how ineffective this teacher was. And then
Mm-hmm.
as a principal, what you do is you pose the question to your teachers and ask them to grade the teacher. How do you think this teacher,
Mm.
similar to some of the things that we did during T-TESS and pedostry,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
you're looking
Mm-hmm.
at teachers and having to score and say, do you think it's effective or ineffective? But it's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting as a principal when you share that with your teachers, how some of them uh, would rank high what what was clearly deemed an ineffective teacher. So
Yeah.
that whole shared understanding and conversations about learning and teaching,
Yeah.
are so vitally important, and something that we miss the mark on just because of the time and the demands that are put on, just the cacophony of
Mm-hmm.
noise as a principal that's stirring in your head that you don't even know. I can remember getting home from a day as a principal, and my husband would say, "How was your day?" And I'd say, "Honestly, Pat, I can't remember," because it would be a
Mm.
hundred different conversations
Mm-hmm.
about a hundred different things. And I can
Yeah.
guarantee you that calibrating and trying to work with my teachers to have a shared understanding about what effective teaching
Yeah.
looks like and sounds like wasn't at the top of my agenda for that given day.
Sure. Yep.
So speaking about what effective teaching looks like, and talking to your teachers about it and making sure
Mm-hmm.
that everybody knows what that looks like. One of the things, Kathy, that you reminded me of is one of the things that I did towards, at the last campus I was at, where we pulled out our journals. Every teacher had a journal, and they tabbed
Mm.
it with each domain. And so we had to break it up, similar to what Kathy, Jerry, and I broke it up for so many Saturdays for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we talked about different things. Like, for example, we had one of the new initiatives that we had as a district and as a campus were calming corners. Because we had a
Mm.
lot of students, that were having, especially after COVID, that were having a very difficult time with
Yeah.
behaviors, adjusting,
Right.
things like that. And so our counselor came in and provided professional development on counseling corners. So we made sure that they knew that every professional development, every initiative, it's all tied to T-TESS somewhere. And there's a reason
Yeah.
why we're
Mm-hmm.
bringing this in. And so
Yeah.
we went into the domain specific that it went into, and we talked about, well, let's look at, if you were to be implementing calming corners, what would that look
Mm-hmm.
like? Let's look at the rubric, and I would have a copy of the rubric. They would glue it on their
Mm.
journal, and let's look at proficient, what that looks like. Well, let's look at
Mm-hmm.
accomplished. And I know a lot of the wording there is talking about being proactive with
Mm-hmm.
behaviors. And so, are you being proactive in the classroom and sending a student to the calming corner when you start to see signs
Right.
that they need it? Or are you doing it when they're already having a full blown breakdown?
Right.
And
Right.
so, that provided opportunities for the teachers to have that dialogue within each other. And so we can
Mm.
talk about growth and have that self reflection to think, what am I doing with specific students in my classroom? And how can these calming corners help, and not see it as, because a lot of times, when new things or new initiatives come in, a lot of times we tend to get a little defensive and say, oh, something else new again. But really talking
Right.
about the purpose and seeing how it aligns to T-TESS and to what we do and how it can help students in the long run, I think is proves to be very effective if they can actually see
Mm,
how T-TESS really aligns with what they're doing in the classroom and the initiatives we
yeah.
have as a campus or as a district and how it aligns to our campus improvement plan.
Well,
Yeah.
and
Erica,
Oh,
you did
that's
such
so important.
Erica did such a great job with that because she was
yeah.
very deliberate
Hmm.
about having the teachers at the faculty meetings bring those journals. And
Mm,
just I can remember it was something that you were consistent with, and we actually talked about taking that as Erica's work
Yeah.
and being the stepping stone of some. Well, and it may be. We're still working on a surprise little project. That whole reflective journal piece that we're kind of
mm,
talking about right now, because our whole mantra, our goal is to find ways that we can really make a positive impact to improve teaching and learning. But
yeah.
we say we're the heartbeat of principles, but really I think if we were really to uh, put our heads together, we're really the heartbeat of teachers. you know
Yeah.
I
who
agree.
we are,
Yeah.
our philosophy. We all share a very similar philosophy of education that's deep rooted. And that was what was so beautiful with the synergy of us working together, because we uh, we have a similar philosophy of you know teaching and learning and education.
Mm-hmm.
And we say we're the heartbeat of principals, but we're really the heartbeat of teachers, because that's where we all began.
I
Yeah.
totally agree with that. When you talk about the
Yeah.
heartbeat of teachers and really helping them see where the work that they do aligns in every area, you made me think of Erica when I would be sitting in RTI support meetings or ARDs, and I go back to domain 1.2, which is data and assessment. And you have these teachers who have just spilled their heart out on really tracking data on a child, and they know the child from historical all the way up to where they
Mm-hmm.
currently are with qualitative and quantitative data. I was able to
Mm,
align and show them this is a continuing part of the evaluation piece. And so giving them
yeah.
feedback and credit, I call it credit at times, because sometimes I think that they think we don't notice when we were
Yeah.
sitting in those meetings. And so really
Mm-hmm.
taking it and aligning the dots for them of the work that they're doing. I had teachers that said, I haven't ever had an administrator, really give me thoughtful feedback on the feedback
Yeah.
that I've collected on my students and the data and the information.
Mm,
And so that's what it made me think of too. And just figuring out ways to connect the dots for teachers so
yeah.
that they understand that the work that they're doing is a continuous cycle of improvement. And I always think of sometimes improvement has a negative connotation, but really a
Mm-hmm.
cycle of continuous, you know, sharpening your tool of getting better.
Yeah.
One thing that I think, I can remember that, oh, when all the testing, first began, what we have, I can't
Mm-hmm.
even remember in the day, tax, toss,
Oh,
teaks,
yes.
Mm-hmm.
and then there's all that uh conversation about, well, now we're expecting teachers to just teach to the test. And
Mm-hmm.
if you could reframe that, one thing that I will say is that
Mm.
what happened, I can remember I had a second grade teacher that used to always every year do her Elvis Presley unit. And so some of that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
we kind of reined it in a little bit, and which is okay to do Elvis Presley as long as have a clear idea of what those your objectives are, your goals, and
Yeah, sure.
that the point being is, I think for T-TESS, even though it was a lot of it's been a journey for teachers
Mm.
and principals. One thing that it is aligned with the standards,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of has helped us do these learning walks and have conversations where they need to
Right.
be about what is effective practice. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
really positive thing.
Mm. I love hearing how you kind of tied a lot of these different things that feel disjointed in education and tie it all back to student growth and success. Like, that's really what all of these different pieces are about. But a lot of times, administrators don't connect those dots, and teachers don't really see that connection or see how implementing a Common Corner is going to help with T-TESS evaluations. Like, just a lot of those kinds of things feel like you said, another thing to add and another thing to add, instead of that just kind of continuous growing and learning to better serve students. I'd love to hear more about the actual T-TESS Blackbook itself. Like, what is it? What's in it? Like, can we kind of walk through, as you're putting these together, how did you decide what should it say and what should be in it and how it should be organized and those kinds of details? I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, it started with a lot of post-it notes. Then
That's for
Erika's
started
got
with,
it. She got it
Yes,
handy.
I've got it right here.
and then it started with really identified our strengths, and that's where the synergy was. And Erica was the one that was so good at formatting and the technology. She even came up with the little emoji or the icon with the look fors, and was able to take all of our chart paper and organize it for us. I think, we broke it apart, and we just, I don't even know how we did that. It was a long.
Remember, Kathy, we segmented it. So we started with like domain 1, and we went through the standards, and then we went through the rubric, and then we gave each other homework. We're like, okay, our homework is to go back and list everything of what, this is what I recall, ladies, so y'all correct me if I'm wrong. And our homework was to go and like talk about, after we talked about it, then put it down on paper, like everything that we remembered, what were our look fors. And then when we came together, that's when we shared what we saw and did that real collaboration, because then it helped us remember things, added more things, or the things we had in common. We had a lot in common about what things looked like, but we also had things that we added on.
And so we're all different learners, which I think is great. Because Kathy's the big overall thinker. I'm a lot more concrete sequential. So with that being said, like we started off on one of our pages with definition of terms, because as we were looking through, as we were looking through the tool, we saw a lot of specific words that just on the rubric kept coming up over and over, like anticipates, advocates, inconsistency, limited, persists. So we had to talk about what does it mean to persist, because you look from proficient to accomplished. There was a difference with persists. You saw that word, that term a lot in accomplished and distinguished. So what does that look like? What does it mean for me to persist? So we had to have a definition of terms that we had on there, and we knew we wanted it tabbed. We were very big. This is going to sound silly, but ladies, remember we had to have a coil bounding, because we thought when I'm sitting on a Friday night with my glass of wine, I need to be able to flip it.
Lay flat.
It has to lay flat. And we separated it by domains. And so that's where the ladies were saying we separated it into, from each domain, we had our look fors, and then we had the descriptive language. And we wanted to make sure that we had the look fors on top and the the descriptive language below it, so that principals could be able to see, okay, what am I looking for if I see developing, proficient, accomplished, distinguished? What would I be looking for in the classroom? And then what language would I use whenever I'm giving them feedback? Now, even though in the look fors, we separated it by each area in rating, for the descriptive language, though, we just did a fine line between developing and needs improvement. And then the other was proficient, accomplished, and distinguished on the other side, because we felt like it really depends on that terminology, which way you're going to be going. And I know whenever we took the practice tests and what have you, they would tell us, depending on the terminology and how proactive you're being, when you're visiting that classroom, it might depend on
Mm-hmm.
whether you rate them proficient or accomplished. And
Mm-hmm.
so we didn't want to determine that for people, but just
Yeah.
keep that open for what you specifically see in the classroom. And then at the
Mm.
end, and then after that, we had dimension questions. So then when you meet with a teacher, what kind of questions do you need to
Okay.
ask? And
Yeah.
below that, we had the matching teacher standards, what Kathy's aha
Hmm.
moment, that let's
Right.
align
Yeah.
again, let's go back and circle back to what those standards
Right.
are and
Right.
how they align to the questions you're going to ask,
Yeah.
um, based on that. Because there, a lot of times there's follow-up questions. I know a lot of times when I went in and did an observation, I had my look force, I had my language, but then
Mm-hmm.
I had other things that I was curious about. And one of the ways that you can make sure to send the message to teachers that this is a growth tool and it's a
Mm.
conversation, it's a discussion, is
Yeah.
at the post conference, if I'm meeting with you and you're explaining why you did what you did, that I
Mm-hmm.
can be like, oh, so I thought that that was proficient, but now that you're explaining to me how you were doing it, your intent behind it, that moves it, the needle to a higher rating or what have you. But being able to have
Okay.
those conversations is extremely important.
And the same
Yeah.
in regard to it not being a gotcha,
Yes.
because within
Right.
our realm of education right now, it is so important for our teachers to understand that it's truly a growth opportunity for them. And I can give you an
Mm-hmm.
example for this. There was a time when I was talking with a special education teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and she had taught, for example, a whole group lesson, which was not a part of her daily routine, but she wanted to choose
Okay.
to do a whole kindergarten full 45-minute lesson. Well, she
Okay.
doesn't do that every day. And so
Yeah.
within the classroom environment management part, she's
Yeah.
still learning to manage a whole 20, 22 kiddos.
Right.
That's a little different than
Right.
working in a group with your special ed kiddos in a small
Right.
group.
Mm-hmm.
And so having the conversation that, hey, okay, in that lesson, you took a risk and really wanting to grow in that area. But I
Yeah.
know that we won't have the opportunity to see you again in that specific arrangement. Let me follow up with walkthroughs, and when I come in, we're going to
Mm.
specifically be looking at
Mm-hmm.
classroom management and how you're working with kids with different behavior needs,
Mm-hmm.
because that's really in your zone of the work that you're
Right.
doing. So at the end of
Right.
the year conference, what do you know? Because you've been able to go back and touch back on that, then on the rubric of the summative, the person can actually show growth. So
Yeah.
that's a big part of being able to understand the whole evaluation process. That it's truly a growth mindset of how we're able to support
Right.
teachers.
Right.
You know,
I'd love to hear, yeah, let's dig in there. I want to hear some more specifics about how you created a trust-based environment around evaluations. Go ahead, Kathy. I know I
I
cut
know
you
what
off.
Kathy's going to say
so
here. Go, Kathy.
you know, ready. One thing that I strongly believe
Mhm.
is that when, as a principal, you think about the one-on-one time that you're able to have with the teacher, that is
Mhm.
like diamond. It is golden, golden time.
Mm.
And teachers work so hard. And I'm not saying that they're all of us have room for growth and improvement,
Mhm.
but I think
Yeah.
it's vitally important as a principal, when you have that time with a teacher, that you're able to fill their bucket and at least
Mm.
identify, even if it's, a bulletin board. I don't know. They work so hard, and the only way that we're going to help them grow is if you can start with what they're doing right. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
especially now, looking at the attrition rate and the shortage, the way
Yeah.
that they, and so those conversations, I think that they take on a different shape and form as a principal. For those
Mhm.
teachers that are trying so hard, I can remember a kindergarten teacher that had horrible classroom management, and she
Mhm.
would not give up. I mean, there were days that she'd be in the front office with a bottle of 7 Up, a big 3-liter bottle of 7 Up and
I
crackers,
thought you
sick
were
as a
going to
dog.
say something else, Kathy.
And, but the point is I will work with a teacher that wants to learn and grow
Absolutely.
till the
Yeah.
cows come home. That is a conversation that's what this, that's what we're about, is helping uh,
Mm-hmm.
teachers grow. But there are, in some cases, teachers that have, there's I call it the consonance dissonance theory, when how the teacher perceives themselves is radically different than how they're being perceived by their peers and by me as the principal. Then
Sure.
that conversation takes on a different shape and form, because they think that they're, a masterful teacher, and
Mm-hmm.
if it doing more harm, then those conversations take a different shape and form. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where, these standards, one thing after each domain, like domain 1.1, the standards, we have the reflection questions that you would have
Mm-hmm.
with the teacher for the conference, but also then behind that are the written out standards that like with the dimension 1.1, underneath it it'll say like 1A, 1B, 3B
Mm-hmm.
standards basis. Well, I didn't know what 1A, 1B, when I was scoring teachers, I just saw
Sure.
1A, 1B. I had no
Yep.
idea what it was. But then when they're read out aloud, there are things like 1A, teacher standard. Teacher designs clear, well organized, sequential lessons that build on students' prior knowledge.
Yeah.
That is a basic teaching standard right
Yep.
there. So that's your muscle power. That's why those standards
Mm.
are so important. They reinforce and are important for a teacher that's effective. But man, they're your muscle power when you need to have some really tough conversations with a teacher that's ineffective and may need to be coached out of the profession. Honestly, even
Yeah.
though we're kind of having a teacher shortage, but yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about using T-TESS effectively to enhance school culture. Like, how did you guys use this tool in a way that wasn't punitive, but that also encouraged like teacher collaboration? I know teachers will often fear like, oh, there's that star teacher over there that the principal loves and they can't do anything wrong and they've got their classroom together and I'm over here struggling and I'm just getting punished or I'm getting more work or more things put on my plate. Like, how did you guys avoid that trap and be able to use this tool in a way that encouraged collaboration and built trust rather than kind of take away from it?
Well, I think it first starts with relationships. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
core of being able to talk through receiving and giving feedback is that you have
Mm-hmm.
to build on relationships amongst each other
Mm-hmm.
and amongst the leadership. I mean, that's like at the core root, because people aren't going to
Yeah.
be able to um, receive feedback or even ask for feedback if they don't trust you.
Yeah.
And I think you just have to work as a team and make sure to
Mm.
provide the continuous support. That is extremely important. I know, for example, with one of my teachers, it's not enough to give that feedback and just say you
Mm.
need to work on A and B. It's you have to
Mm.
model it for them. They have to be able to have
Mm.
conversations about it. They have to try it and then go in, let me see how you did. How do you think you did? And one of the things that we also did at one of the previous
Mm.
campuses that I was at, it was a very large school, 7 teachers per grade level. And when we sat during PLCs, we talked about
Mhm.
letting them talk about what are your struggles. And they were like, oh,
Mm.
Miss Roy does really good with this. I want to learn from her. And so we would give them
Mm.
opportunities to go and observe
Mm-hmm.
that particular teacher. But then she
Okay.
could go into their classrooms and either give them feedback or get feedback herself. Um,
Mm.
it really helps when they collaborate and you give them that opportunity to collaborate, to
Mhm.
be in each other's classrooms, because you have to be intentional about it and say,
Right.
let's schedule this time. Or you also can partner up teachers. That's another thing that we did, because a lot of times it's intimidating for them. They
Yeah.
get really worried about their colleagues going in and
Mm-hmm.
visiting them. I was
Yeah.
surprised
Right.
that they're actually
Yeah.
they're actually more stressed if their colleague comes in their classroom than an administrator sometimes.
Yeah, right.
Right.
But it's true.
And
Yeah,
so
that's
I
your buddy.
think
You don't want them to see you messing up or realizing like, oh, they think you're a rock star and they realize you get in there and like, oh, you have this one glaring hole that you don't know what to do with. Like it's true.
and really giving them the opportunity for them to tell you what makes them feel comfortable. Like I said, you can either
Mm.
buddy them up with somebody and just say, hey,
Mhm.
it's between the two of you. And one of you can
Mm.
observe the other one, and vice versa. You can talk about it, and it's
Yeah.
non evaluative. You talk about it on your own.
Mm.
Another thing that we've done is I've had teachers record themselves. How about
Ooh.
you
Yeah.
place the camera, record yourself, and then you can, and a lot of times they're like, I don't want to see myself. It's you
Yeah.
trying to be
Yeah.
reflective about your teaching because it's very
Right.
different. I know, like I said, one of the things that I've done in my many years of education is professional
Mm.
development. And
Mhm.
I remember I used to have a supervisor that was very strict with us whenever she
Mm.
would have us all observe us doing a training. And then the rest of the people would be writing feedback. And then after we were done, they would tell us,
Yeah.
these are your glows, these are your grows. And we were always
Yeah.
very nervous because we were going to get that feedback right then and there. And that was very
Mhm.
intimidating.
Yeah.
But it's different once you record yourself, then that's kind of a
Mm.
conversation or reflection you have with your own self
Right.
about what did I
Right.
look like? I didn't realize that I wasn't paying attention to this group, in the
Yeah.
corner. And so I
Mhm.
think having the conversation with your teachers and allowing them to select what they feel comfortable, because
Yeah.
as adults, we're all just like the students. We're all different learners. We learn in
Mhm.
different ways. Different things make us nervous. I mean, Jerry is really good at talking in front of
Mm.
people and just, you know, um,
Mhm.
she's very good at that. And I remember right before we were going to talk in this podcast, I was like, I'm a little bit nervous because it's the first time I've ever done a podcast.
Yeah.
And so all of us have a different way of delivering information, a different way of
Mhm.
reflecting. And we've talked a lot about it with Kathy and Jerry, how you have to differentiate for the adults as
You
well
do.
and what they feel
Yeah.
comfortable
Right.
doing.
Yep.
And
We talk
what
about differentiating for kids all the time, but when do we
right.
talk about differentiating for the adults?
Right. Right.
And providing those layers of support. So what she described is like just really figuring out what are the layers of support after you give the feedback that's going to be able to move the needle in a positive way. Because
Yeah.
it's not we didn't go into the classrooms thinking, okay, how are we going to help them go down in their evaluation? Because the
Yeah.
summative you
Right.
could go
Right.
down. I mean, in
Yeah.
realistic terms, but we're
Yeah.
always looking at how can we move the needle for them to improve and to get better at their
Mm.
craft, because at the end of the day they're educating kids
Mhm.
that are going to be taking care of us one day. You know what I mean? I think of our democracy depends on an
Mhm.
educated populace, and if we don't have leaders who are able to really give adequate feedback to the people that are leading in the classroom,
Yeah.
we're not going to have really good outcomes. And so
Right.
that, I think, is at the core of the work and why we came together to do this. I mean, don't you guys think that? I mean, we really
Yeah.
are passionate about kids, and we chose to be
Mhm.
leaders because we're passionate about kids and we had more influence within the realm of helping to
Mm.
support kids. And so
Mm.
really
And
the
one thing sure is that, I was a staff development specialist like Erica, working on professional development
Mhm.
in Northside, where I
Okay.
served as a principal. And we know that from the research that the number one way that you're going to help a teacher improve their craft is through reflection.
Mhm.
But you've got to create all of those avenues where they have trust with their team, and
Yeah.
to the question about the culture of the school, if we want
Yeah.
to improve instruction to ultimately enhance and improve student learning, that culture is vitally important for a teacher to reflect. And
Right.
I can remember doing something that was called Jerry and Erica might remember the high five teacher observation,
Okay.
where they would go into another teacher's classroom, but it all had to be positive, to give
Mm.
them a high five of
Mhm.
something that they're doing well. But they first
Mm.
have to be able to, that's why those reflection journals like Erika did with T-TESS
Yeah.
was such a cool idea, because we know if we really want to improve, you know, teaching, it has to start from within the teacher. The teacher
Mm-hmm.
has to say, hey, my goal, and part of that's the vehicle of this T-test is all about goal setting
Mm-hmm.
professional development goals. And there's also another layer there about the work that Glickman has done on the levels of teacher professional
Mm-hmm.
development. When I first started out as a teacher, I was more concerned, is my border straight on my bulletin board?
Sure.
When
Yep.
I teacher, it was more,
Mm-hmm.
about why aren't they getting double digit addition with regrouping? What can I do to
Yeah.
teach?
Yep.
So that's that whole differentiation piece. But at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, that culture has to be there, or none of it will occur.
I think it's just the campus. That's how you creating a culture of growth mindset is
Mm-hmm.
really what's going to make it a positive one where everybody, including the leaders, the principal. I know one of the things I always did is I would talk to them about what I wanted to grow on and what I could improve on, and
Mm.
making sure
Exactly.
that everybody knows that all of us have room for growth, that there is
Yeah.
not a single one of
Right.
us that can't grow in an area. And being able to be vulnerable like that in front of your staff
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and giving them opportunities to have discussions, like, like Kathy said, in that reflection journal that we did and what have you. How
Mm-hmm.
can we posing more questions than giving them the answers? Because when you pose
Mm.
questions and have them have those discussions, then we're opening up, the arena for them feeling comfortable to have
Yeah.
discussions about how we can grow. And
Right.
we're not just, stuck in one place. We're always talking about growing, each and every one of us.
Mm.
And I agree with that, Erica. I think one of the things as instructional leaders of a campus is that we do have an obligation to model. And modeling is the key to creating that collaborative growth and mindset across the campus. Because if
Mm.
they see, I mean, we all know if we're parents, we have kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our kids pick up the good, the bad, the ugly, I mean, whether we
Yep.
want them to pick it up or not. And just
Yeah.
as a leader of a school, the way we lead, I mean, that impacts the way people are going to learn, right? If they see that
Mm.
we are not the growth mindset people. I remember, Kathy, when you were principal, you always had a
Mm.
new theme, a new
Mm-hmm.
book. I mean, there was always a new something that she was
Mm.
modeling for her staff of what we were going to be working
Mm.
on, which was her
Mm-hmm.
overarching goal. And so when Erika talked about, connecting the dots, well, the
Yeah.
principal evaluation is called the T-TESS evaluation, the
Mm-hmm.
principal part of it. And so articulating, like Erika said, what our overarching goal was and how they connected to the campus overarching goal, which connected to
Mm.
the teacher overarching
Mm-hmm.
goal. So when they
Mm-hmm.
see that we're all working toward the same goal, it may look a little
Yeah.
different in our realm. That really sets the stage for good conversation, great collaboration, and sometimes some difficult conversations that are actually going to impact kids.
Yeah.
We're all in this
Yeah.
together.
Right.
Right.
That's great. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and stay
Well,
tuned for our next piece that we're working on, right? Or we kind of
I
need to
can't
There
wait.
is another piece that we'll have to circle back on, Beth.
Yeah, I'm so
And there's
excited.
also a piece through responsive learning. I mean, there's also a T-TESS component that's offered through responsive learning that I actually used as a principal for like the refresher, which ties right in quite nicely with our book. And so there's all sorts of great things on the horizon.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'll make sure that we link all of those things in the show notes when
Mm-hmm.
this comes out. We're at an hour.
Oh, wow.
Our time is up. Shockingly, I have 40 more questions to work through. But before we go, I love to end with just a word of encouragement to our listeners, to the principals that are in the thick of it, especially the new principals that are still just figuring this out. I'd love for each of you to kind of take a second and just speak to them. Like, what would you say to either yourself in your first 3 years or the principals that are in that position now? Kathy, why don't we start with you?
Oh my gosh, boy, it brings back so many memories. My first three
Mm.
years as a principal, I don't even think I knew I was a principal. I was so discombobulated,
Yeah.
and then I woke up, but the really, because I had such a vision in my head of what I want
Mm.
the school to be, and how that was a question they asked me when I interviewed. Take us on a virtual tour of your school. What will it feel like the minute we walk in the door? What will teachers be doing? What will we
Oh,
see?
cool. Yeah.
How will it feel? And I can remember I used the analogy of when you walk in the front doors of the school, you're going to go in the front office, and you'll feel like almost as if you're in your mother's kitchen and mom's kitchen. There'll be
Mm.
laughter, you'll smell coffee.
Yeah.
When you walk down the halls, you're going to see student work everywhere. And um, It was 3 years. My first few years, I was so clueless. I had
Yeah.
vision, but it was about 3 years later that it was about November, and
Mm.
I had a moment where I was reflecting, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is an amazing school, and I'm the
Mm.
principal. And I was taking a parent on a tour and realized that what I had visualized, I had created. And so my
Oh,
word for new principles is keep the vision, keep the faith.
yeah.
You can make it happen. If you believe it,
Mm.
it will happen. What was that baseball movie? What was that
Field of
saying from the?
Dreams. Is it Field of Dreams? Yeah.
Yes, yes. What was the saying there from Field of Dreams? I forget. Something about seeing it and believing it. You
Yeah.
have vision, you can make it come true.
I love that. Erica, how about you?
I would say to brand new principal, any principal, really
Mm.
slow down, build
Mm.
relationships. Relationships are the key. I am now, I just finished my first year as Director of Human Resources. And so I
Mm.
am now in that, in this new position. One thing that I have learned is
Mm.
I get to see the overarching, principles in on every campus. And
Yeah.
a lot of times when what really stands out is if you build relationships with your staff
Mm.
members, with your community, with your students,
Mm.
there is not a problem you can't solve.
Mm.
That relationship is really the key, because you can
Yeah.
come across
Mhm.
the biggest challenge ever, but if you have a relationship with that person, you can sit down and talk through solutions
Yeah.
and come to an agreement on what's best for students at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The very first principal, my principal mentor, Jayana Kelly, big shout out to
Oh.
her. She
Hmm.
was the best
Mm.
mentor ever. She was actually a mentor for both Jerry and I.
She was when I opened the new
And
Oh.
school.
and I remember talking to her and asking her, when you come to, a decision to make, where
Mm.
do you lean and how do you decide? And she
Mm.
told me, Erica, at the end of the day, if you ever have to figure out what decision to make, as long as you lean on the side of, is it better for the student, or are we doing this for the student or for the adult? And if
Mm.
you are making the decision best based on what's in the best interest of the student, you can never go wrong.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
good.
those are the two tidbits I'd like to leave
Yeah. I
for all
love
principals.
that.
Hmm.
Wow.
Mm. Jerry, is there anything you would like to share kind of based on the conversation we've had today?
Well, probably the last short thing that I'll say is that nothing happens
Mm.
by chance. When you've been
Mm.
afforded a leadership role, someone believed in you. So don't have that negative
Mm.
self talk of, am I good enough?
Yeah.
Am I doing the right thing?
Right.
Find your people, find your tribe. These ladies right
Mm.
here, we found each other through a professional organization. And so you've
Mm.
got to be connected to be able to lean on people that are doing the work that you're doing, because it
Yeah.
is too hard and it's very lonely. It's very lonely at the
Yeah.
top. And so find your people, have connections with those people so that you're not alone. And remember, nothing happens by chance. Someone tapped you on the shoulder to let you
Mm.
know to step into the arena. And so you're right where you're supposed to be. Have faith in yourself.
Mm. I love that. Thank you all so much for this conversation. It was so great to hear from you. And I know that our listeners are going to just dive into this and love this. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
you.
you.